Okay, so first of all, let me boast a little bit. So my name is Alex Ojeda, and I'm with Permaculture Jacks, and you can find us on Meetup and Facebook. And one of the things that I like to do is spread the word about permaculture, because one day, a long time ago, I put in a permaculture garden and went away for a month and came back, and I had massive amounts of food and hadn't done anything to it. And I said to myself, whoa. For years and years and years, at least a decade, I had been itching and scratching and digging and bending and kneeling and fighting and pesting and this kind of thing and pulling weeds. And I realized that's a lot of work, and I'm buying a lot of stuff. And it's hard to say that even one bag of fertilizer is worth the produce that's coming out of this garden. But I got this book by Bill Mollison called Introduction to Permaculture, and one page, it was like half a page, it describes the idea of doing a lasagna garden or a layered garden. Sheet mulching is what it's called sometimes. And then I did that, and I went away to intern on building earthships, which are really super efficient kick-butt homes, and very excited about that too. But when I got back after a month, my garden was this tall. Collard greens, broccoli, onions, lettuces, garlic, beets, all the root vegetables, everything. I had just basically put them in the ground and left. And I didn't know what to expect. When I got back, everything was ready to eat. And I said to myself, I have got to share this information with everybody. So the trick of it now is, I wish I had pictures of my garden right now that I could put on the screen. But right now it's the same story. I've got more perennials, perennials being plants that go on and on and on and don't need you to replant them. And I have all my annuals planted in and around them. But I never fertilize, I never water, I never weed. Think of anything else that makes gardening suck. I don't have to do any of that. I literally, no, you don't have to water. I mean, so first of all, think about this. If I turn around and look at the woods, who's watering the woods? Nobody. Anytime there's a drought, we only have droughts in our gardens, right? And those gardens are, I get the impression they're designed for speed, but I plan on being here next year and the year after that. So I can very quickly put in a garden that even immediately will start producing food. I tell people you can be eating in 3 weeks, which is not very long. 60 to 90 days, everything's out of the ground. And in 120 days, everything, even the long-term plants should be, producing food for you. But what about food that if I plant it, it never goes away? What if I have a spinach that is there year-round? And every time I'm, pulling parts off my spinach plant, I can just strip the leaves off and there's a little bit left, like a stem, and I can stick that in the ground and I get a whole new plant. Now every time I eat, I have more food when I come back. So that's a plan of abundance. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's the way nature works. Nature doesn't say, oh, it's such hard work to grow plants, I'm just going to give up. Nature just naturally expands and moves and grows and gets bigger and more lush, creates more climate, creates more atmosphere, sequesters more carbon and water and whatnot, and gives habitat to everything and provides food for everybody. Well, that's the way I want my garden to be, right? So the most important thing now is to get my mind into a perennial channel versus on the annual channel. What people don't realize is that a lot of our annual foods, which is what mainly we buy in the grocery store, are actually from perennial plants. And they've actually been turned into annuals. There's a whole lot to this. I mean, some perennials are annuals in certain climates, so there's that too. But we've cultivated these plants basically from weeds, and we've brought them forward as big, juicy, fruiting plants, and we fight them to make them work in whatever climate we're in. So in permaculture, we go out and find the plants that grow very naturally right here in this climate with this kind of rainfall, and we put them in our garden. And then we find the things that we like to eat that are in the grocery store, and we put those in the garden too. So when one isn't there, the next one is, right? So like let's talk about spinach. You know how the spinach you buy in the store is a cold weather plant and it actually likes to be frozen a couple of times and it goes through the freezes? Well, the perennial spinach will die back when it's frozen, but it comes back the minute it warms up. So when it warms up, the cold spinach goes away. So it makes sense to have two different spinaches going at the same time. And there are plants for just about every category that fill that bill. What we like to do is put in trees. Keep trees kind of small, just by pruning them back and keeping them into a dwarf shape. And they will continue to give you fruit year-round. And there's always so much fruit. Even a tree that you're holding back will give you so much fruit that you have to share it with everybody. And so you've got, this is something a lot of people don't know. You have a variety that will start fruiting early in the year, and there's a variety that will start in the middle of the year, and there's a variety that will even start at the end of the year.
On the same tree?
On different trees. So you have 3 different trees, and you end up with, like, let's just use mulberries for an example. You have mulberries that go all year long. They actually say that a mulberry is a 9-month tree, a 9-month fruiter, because they even have one that will live, not necessarily produce, but it will live in frozen salt water in Scandinavia. I mean, that's crazy. Frozen salt water? I mean, that's like a death knell for just about any other plant. So we find varieties of plants that will live in our environment. What's funny about Jacksonville is we can grow anything here, but most things we grow here end up being annualized because we have too hot in the summer for a lot of things and too cold in the winter for a lot of things. So we grow a cross combination of things. Okay, and when you grow, I mean, we can get more into companion planting and guilds and things, but I'm just going to go down to the basics. Let's talk about how we put in that garden, because this is what this is about, right? Anytime you see exposed soil, have you ever noticed there's lots of weeds growing in it? And that's because nature does not like exposed soil at all. So when you are exposing the soil, you're actually forcing nature to do something you don't want it to do. And she doesn't listen because she gets the last vote. Okay? So you're out there pulling weeds constantly. Well, weeds are plants that have put roots in the ground. They generally drop from the top, so weed barrier is a waste of money. Because the minute you put something over weed barrier, it's going to start dropping in from the top and start growing right out of the top of the weed barrier. So save the money. Use it as shade. Okay, put it over the top for shade, because your plants really need shade more than they need, in Florida, more than they need any kind of weed barrier. So if you don't want to have weeds growing on your soil, you have to mulch it, or you have to take over, you have to occupy that soil. And so a lot of times people will do things like plant, like in the winter we plant Austrian winter peas. And they grow about knee high, and sometimes they can grow even taller, but generally they're going to be about knee high. And you can go out there and just chop the tops off of those winter peas, and they make a great salad just like that. Just a little salad dressing if you want, or none. And then just eat it. It's amazing, right? Mix that with anything else, it's fantastic. But when you have root intrusion in the ground and you have closed canopy, as we call it, and there's no sunlight hitting the soil, you're not going to have weeds. And even if you do have a weed, just pinch it over and push it back onto the ground. Just out-compete it. Weeds are wonderful. As a matter of fact, what I do is I tell people, leave one of every weed in your garden and then watch it and study it and look it up. Because every single time I've done that, I've been opened up to an amazing world of just food and medicine and insectiary and insect repellent and insect attractant plants that are just out there waiting to help you in your garden. So if I have something that pops up, like here's an example, ragweed. What most people know about ragweed is there's a certain time at the end of its season where it starts putting off a pollen, and that pollen makes everybody sneeze and and they hate it. Well, what happens when you have ragweed start out is all the aphids in your garden hit ragweed and they stay on it and they don't leave. And they go through their cycle and then they die off and they go away. And now your tomatoes and your onions and everything else are just fine. All right, and your peppers. So you don't have aphid problems because you have a little ragweed. Okay, so what happens if I pinch it over after all the aphids are gone? Or I can even just cut the aphids off and take them somewhere. I don't even have to do anything. They don't even seem to hurt the plant. But then I just fold it over, and that plant grew, and it pulled all this great stuff out of the air, carbon and whatnot. It went down into the ground, and it pulled minerals and water and things out of the ground, and it made this plant. And now I have all of that material in my garden. And all I had to do was, while I was out there getting my spinaches or my lettuces, I just folded the plant over and pushed it onto the ground. And that's it. I wouldn't call that work. Okay, so there's one reason that you want to have ragweed in your garden. But then I noticed there was a ragweed and a plant called Sonchus oleifera, which is also sow's thistle. And it looks a little bit like a dandelion when it flowers and it poofs out with its little seed pods. But it also looks like a thistle, but I do believe it is actually related to the dandelion more so than a thistle. And its leaves, and they're all over the place right now actually, they come to the stem and they wrap around, so it's like this, and they wrap around, sort of like they've been pinned through the stem. Have you seen those?
I think I have.
They're edible. And when the aphids run to your garden and they see the ragweed and they see a sonchus, they go, and they sit on the sonchus and leave the ragweed alone. So then I said to myself, wait, Sonchus is even better than that. First of all, it's edible, it's pretty. Well, I think it is. And it's even more exciting to the aphids than anything else. So if I see one of those popping up, I actually take the seeds and I drop them in for next season because I want them to pop up again. And anything that grows out of the garden that can be mulched back down is like free fertilizer. Okay? Now, the way we start the gardens used to be I would just throw manure and hay and things in layers. But now what I do is we're living on a sandbar, basically, in the tropics. Because it's so warm, the microbial life never has to stop. So it never freezes and pushes it deeper into the ground. And because of that freeze, up north they get 6 feet of topsoil. But here it never does. So they're constantly eating and they're always looking for that next thing to drop and eat it up. So our soil is never going to be that thick normally anyway, because we're in this is warm temperate zone, not even subtropical yet. Warm temperate zone is still enough to suck up all the topsoil. But in some cases you can get a foot or so. But it also helps if you don't just replant longleaf pines everywhere, because longleaf pines don't build soil. They're pioneer plants. They lay down shade and they let other things grow in the shade. And that's what they're there for. But we've like overpopulated our land with longleaf pines, which by the way also poison the soil so that other plants can't compete. And it's called allelopathic, okay? And allelopathia happens with black walnuts and a lot of other trees. They'll actually poison the soil so they don't have to compete. But there are plants that love that poison. Blueberries love the poison. There's a list of plants that love it. So you plant those around your walnut tree, and now everything outside of that, it's not poisoned anymore. This little barrier sucks it right up. So anyway, let's get back to the topsoil thing. We actually dig what's called a pit garden, and it can go by the term hugelkultur, only because in the end that's German for hill culture. But what we do is we put wood down in the ground, and we put leaves, and we put grass clippings, and we put a little bit of soil, and we put more wood and leaves and grass clippings and soil. And we just pile it up until at the very end you have about this much just straight sand, basically, our soil, sand. And then you plant it loaded up with any kind of nitrogen fixer or any kind of plant that will quickly grow and put roots in the ground. And then when you've done that, you load it up with mulch, 8 inches, a foot of mulch. Mulch being, in this case, I would like it to be straw, hay or straw. Because what happens is, in the humidity of the summer, you know how you can have a lot of humidity? You walk out and you think it must have rained, but it didn't. The straw is a cylinder, and inside the straw, it gets cooler. So the temperature change from hot to cool causes condensation. And what you end up with is the straw actually waters your garden. But if you mulch with wood chips, it sits on top and evaporates from the sun. When it rains, it goes straight through the mulch, straight through the straw, straight in, and when the sun comes back out, it's down in there and it can't evaporate. When it's wood chips, it soaks in a bit and evaporates a lot of it away. So we're trying to hold on to every drop. So straw is fantastic. It's a little expensive, so I use hay for the most part. But pine straw works too. Just pile up the pine straw. So now we have wood 3 feet down in the ground, leaves, it's basically a large compost pile. We've put the soil back on top. We've mulched it, planted it, we have root intrusion. Now when the rain comes down, it hits the plants and it goes down the stem and it goes into the roots and it sinks into the ground. Instead of, you've seen sand where you pour water on it, it runs across the top and it just goes right out to the drain. Now you're holding on to it. So now you have this huge, say it's the size of a 55-gallon barrel loaded with organic matter. It's gonna hold on to it, and the older it gets and the more it breaks down, the more it becomes soil, the more it's gonna hold on to that water. And these are supposed to last 15 years. Mine, my oldest one is about 3 years now, and I don't have to do anything to it. Just plant it every year and keep it going. And I'm putting in more perennials, things that are there year-round, sort of an anchor garden, basically, something that I can plant around. Let's see here. So there's no watering. You understand why. Anytime rain comes in, it'll just literally fill up your little pocket of organic matter. There's no fertilizing because I actually grow plants. Weeds are a good example of that, but I actually grow plants that I can just chop and drop and put on the ground and it becomes mulch. And over time, you shouldn't see your hay anymore. You should never have to do that again, by the way, because you're growing the plants, and anything that you pull off your plants that you don't eat should go right back on the ground. And maybe you have a little bucket full of hay and you just pull a little bit of hay out and you drop it on the ground, and This is not permaculture, but this is in permaculture, okay? So what we're talking about today is how to have a permanent culture. And that permanent culture is rooted in a permanent agricultural system. We like to base them on trees and on perennials. And the annuals that you like to eat get put in there every now and again, but they're like weeds. They come and go with the seasons. And you can get all of those plants from the grocery store, right? Like when you take the onion sets and cut the little roots off the bottom and throw those away, just put them in the ground and then you get new onions. The tops of carrots, take the greens off and juice them or give them to the bunny. Cut the carrot off and eat it in your salad, and that little bit that people throw away, put that in the ground, at least at the beginning of the cool season, and it will grow. It's actually easier to grow from cuttings of carrots than it is to grow from the seeds of carrots. They're very, very picky, the seeds. However, turnips, rutabagas, sweet potatoes, all that stuff, just throw it out in your garden, annual plants year round. You should not have to buy any new seeds or any new plants. This is a big point because people go and buy seeds all the time and they're rebuying plants from nurseries and they're constantly buying new things. Well, just keep your food going in the garden. Save it, have yourself a little shade house for the summer and a little hot house for the winter, a little glass house for the winter, and then just overwinter certain things. And you get past that little roadblock and then you put them right back in and you're good to go.
You make it sound so easy.
It really is that easy. On the north side of your house, make your shade house, and on the south side of your house, make your greenhouse. Because when the sun comes in the summer or in the winter, it's hitting at like about 36 degrees. And it warms that wall up and keeps your greenhouse hot. But in the summer, when it's about 86 degrees, you have the shade of the front of your house keeping your plants alive in the front.
So shade house on the north side, winter, clear, transparent, glass house on the south side.
That's right. Of course, nothing's going to live there in the summer, really. I mean, maybe a banana tree. Funny thing about a banana tree, it's actually a grass. It's an herb.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, when you have a tree, there's a concept that Bill Mollison put out. He said, plant 12 trees and feed yourself for life. And people go, what? Trees? We grow our stuff in rows out in the garden. That's crazy. The truth of it is, if you have nut trees, you have protein and flour. Because people don't realize nuts can be ground into flour. You can make bread. Yeah. So you can have edible leaves. You can even have edible leaves on that same tree. So you have salad. You can have fruit trees with edible leaves. There's salad and there's fruit. Then you can have olive trees. And the olive trees are creating the oils and the fuels. Think about what's happening here. We're solving a lot of our needs just by what comes out of a tree. What we do know about the world is that we don't have so much climate warming, because you notice that as it gets warmer, it also is getting colder. Okay, we're having climate fluctuation, it's instability. And so climate instability, where you can have a freezing cold day here and then a hot day here and then another freeze, then another hot. The thing that actually stabilizes, there's a couple of really important things that stabilize temperature, and it's generally trees and water. Okay, large bodies of water, we have what's called the continental effect. The further away from the water you get, the more harsh the environment is. Okay, that's the way it is. So people like to be on the coast. It's a lot more, it's a lot more controlled and stable temperature. So what happens is if we chop down enough trees, we're going to hit that critical mass where all of a sudden the world's going in topsy-turvy temperatures and climate crazy and, hurricanes that get too cold and too hot and then they start spinning out of control. So what we need to do is we need to start growing more of our food in tree systems and forest systems. And there's a technique called forest gardening, and there's another one called food forests. Forest gardening is what I do because I keep it open so I can plant my annuals. But a food forest is where I literally go out and find a plot of land that I'm not going to be there a lot, and I plant it up with all of the ecosystem that a tree needs to live. And so when you go out in the woods, you see that there's 7 to 9 layers of a forest. You have the root layer that goes down into the ground. And we're talking about things like carrots and root vegetables and certain like comfrey and tansy and the yarrow and the things that like to dig deep. Not to mention trees that dig even deeper. Then you have the ground covers. Then you have the herbaceous plants. And then you have the shrubs. Then you have the small, medium to large trees. Then you have the vines. If you turn all of that into your food and you find guilds, which are plants that play nicely together and actually help each other out, and you plant all of that in your 20 acres or whatever, within 5 to 7 years, you should be able to walk out there and just harvest and never have to look at it again. It'll take care of itself. And it's been proven that, and you know, you do have to do some tending as those 5 to 7 years go on. And some people say 3 years. So it depends on how good you are. You know, can you get it done in 3 years? But what they're finding out is that the Aztecs and the Mayans, basically their entire property, all of the Brazil, the whole Amazon rainforest supposedly was all food forest until it had been chopped down and exploited and destroyed. Same thing with North America. Everywhere the Native Americans migrated, that entire swath of land was a food forest. But the thing about plants is, unless you're there to harvest them and to pick from them and to love them and do the things that you do, they actually evolve away into non-food plants because there's nothing there to eat the food. Kind of sounds funny. It's like nature knows. If there's nothing here to eat food, I'm going to switch into plants that just hold the ground. And then I'm going to wait for the things that need food before I start growing food again. Because you're not going to have food drop. That's kind of inefficient, remember? Nothing there to eat it, right? So if you have animals, a lot of people do silvopasture. And what that is where you've grown rows and rows of trees, which obviously we don't like rows in permaculture. But you run the animals through to keep them fertilized, and you keep anything that hits the ground eaten. Well, again, that's just another technique that takes care of itself. Out in nature, there is no waste. So in permaculture, and I'm going to leave you guys with this, we do everything that we can to try to keep from having any kind of waste. Waste is a human product. It doesn't happen anywhere else. So that's how we grow our gardens. So we don't waste our time, our energy, or nature's time and energy. We just make a beautiful system that runs itself, and we step out of the way and we let it happen. And then we take advantage of the abundance. And then with our extra energy, we share it. Now that we have our energy of time, we share it with as many people as we can. And then at some point, we're going to be back in the Garden of Eden. Okay? All right. Thank you very much.